I'm just an instructor, man. I just wanted to ask you about the union. I mean, you're not ashamed of your union, are you?
Ashamed? Hey, listen, asshole. We went out 3 years ago for 73, count 'em, fucking days. And I was on that picket line every day.
That's right.
I'm still paying the bills and the money out of bar to support my family. And you know what, asshole? We got our raise. I'm proud of my union.
No, I mean, the thing I don't understand is why you let the union rip you off as much as management, It's like you want to get fucked over or something.
Get your ass out of here. Come on, get out of here. You don't know shit. What the fuck do you know about the union? When I was working the line, you were trying to decide which suit to wear to your fucking sorority dance, man.
It's all right with me, man.
Hey, welcome back to a different type of podcast. We've already done one of these, and it's called Posting Through It Bulletin. And that's where we kind of do, I guess, what you would call a little service journalism.
These episodes are meant to be evergreen, instructional, right? That's something we hear from our listeners, like, I learn about this bad stuff, but what am I supposed to do about it? So these episodes are meant to clear up some questions, be informative. Our last one was about using Signal, the messaging app, how to use it safely, addressing concerns that law enforcement or others may infiltrate Signal chats. So go give that a listen if you haven't already.
And don't forget, if you haven't subscribed to the Patreon, you get episodes on Mondays and Thursdays also, right, Jared? You get those.
Yeah, you get a double dose of Posting Through It. So today we have Esteban Gil. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of y'all's work.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and the work that you've been a part of?
Sure. So I am an organizer, a staff organizer with the News Guild. I support two different locals of the News Guild, the Chicago News Guild and the Pacific Media Workers Guild in San Francisco. And before that, I was an admin worker at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and that's where Mike and I got to know each other, where I, was started off on the shop floor as an organizer and eventually did bargaining, became a steward. And about a year and a half ago, the News Guild hired me full time, and I coach people through the process of building a union in their workplace. So nonprofits, publishing, newsrooms.
And for anybody who followed some of the stuff that came out about me and my work at SBLC during the book tour, you would know that Esteban, who I believe appears in the book at some point, really was my support system for an entire year while I was facing retaliation, and was always not only just very helpful, but also so passionately involved, not only in my life, but in the lives of other workers who were in a really, really shitty situation there with a boss, a main boss, who was very hostile to union activities. So I learned a lot about that, and I became much more of a union person going through it than I was even when I became a steward. And Esteban is really responsible for that. So we really wanted to talk to him and have him impart some of the information that he's imparted to so many people, really, through the last few years, about how to form a union and why. I think the why is even more important.
Yeah, so Esteban, let's start with that. What is the circumstances where, you would advise people to start considering forming a union in their workplace?
I want to take a step back before we get to the whys and kind of talk about what is a union, right? Because you can go online, you can go to the NLRA website or the NLRB website, and there's the legalese definition. And then you've got a canned answer of, well, it's a group of workers establishing a collective bargaining unit. But I like to boil it down to the caramel, right? And just say it's you and your coworkers getting together to force your boss to do what you want them to do, or to stop them from doing what you don't want them to do. So if you have a job, if you have a boss, the question you need to be asking yourself is, do you want your boss to continue to have unfettered, more or less unfettered power over you, or do you want a seat at that table and a voice on the job? And that's you and your coworkers getting together to form a union. And then, the process that we do at the News Guild is we want people to move through and get legal union certification and eventually a collective bargaining agreement. And the way I like to tell people is, do you want a constitution of your workplace?
No,
Right?
tell us about, that step, that constitution, whatever. What happens there? How do we get there? How do you get from, well, I guess, does it essentially start with one person? How does it start? And then how do we get to those next steps where the union is recognized?
Yeah. So it often does start with one person, right? Or a couple of people. And sometimes I have to kind of push folks and say, if it's not you, who's it going to be and when? Right. But we have a process in the News Guild and Communication Workers of America called the 4 Cs, right? C as in Charlie, because our stages tend to move through Cs. And the first is contact, reaching out to your coworkers, making contact with them, trying to understand what it is they care about, seeing who might be interested in learning more. The first thing I do when somebody comes to me and they've got all these issues on their jobs, I start to say, collect information, get me an org chart, do some basic strategic corporate research. And once you get a few people interested, we move into the second phase, which is building a committee. So that's the second C, the committee phase. Building an organizing committee that's representative of your workplace. If you got 100 workers, you want a 15-person organizing committee, and you want that committee to look like your workplace, right? Different shifts, different demographics, different departments. And their task is to methodically go out and build relationships with coworkers. And that is the building block of a union, is the one-on-one relationship of trust that I think you just mentioned that you experienced, right? Once we get to 75, 80% support, that's where we move into that third phase. And support doesn't just mean, at least the way we do things, doesn't just mean, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll sign a card. No, support means that they understand the process. They're prepared for the boss's pushback, and they're willing to be supportive in public in some fashion. And that's when we move into the third C, which is the campaign phase. And that's where we out ourselves as a union. We take collective actions like the signing of a mission statement. We demand voluntary recognition of the employer.
Yeah, there's usually like a card that goes around and like everybody kind of signs it or something like that.
That's it.
I was part of 2 failed union drives. One was at ABC News, which didn't get off the ground digital. I know people were just, I mean, it was a tough fight. I mean, it's Disney and they're very careful with their contracts and everything, but these horrible contracts that people were going through, and they were looking for ways to try to, unionize, and they came after people. And we're getting into this. We're talking about the pushback part of it. I think at ABC, they fired the guy who started the campaign. And I know that's illegal, but it was very difficult to prove that that's how they did it. The next one was at Newsweek, and it turned out that the company was completely bankrupt, had no money, and then there were all these problems with actually unionizing for that reason. And then when I came to the SPLC, I had just been hired, and your work had led to me signing a card, I believe. And I signed the card really before I had just gotten there. I don't want to mention the person who gave it to me, could get them in trouble, but it was welcome for me because I'm obviously very pro-union and was really excited to get it. So yeah, what are the challenges to getting to that point where there's a card that everybody gets?
Well, I think it's a little easier now because I think when you were there, we had to do paper cards, right? So you actually signed a physical piece of paper. Now it's
that's
digital. True. Yeah, now it's digital, which makes things somewhat easier, but digital organizing has its own challenges, right? Organizing cubicle to cubicle and smoke break to smoke break is a lot easier than over Hollywood squares and phone calls. But that's sort of one of the last steps, right? When we know there's support out there, we go out and we ask people to sign their support, and then that's confidential, right? The union card doesn't get outed to the boss. then we demand voluntary recognition, but the other half of it is going the legal route of if you're in the private sector, filing for an NLRB election. And that's you go to the federal government, fill out some forms, and they schedule an election, secret ballot, either by mail or by a mixed in person or all manual, depending on your work site. And winner takes all. And then after that, you get to the fourth C, which is the contract phase. And that's a lot of give and take, probably the hardest part. And I think at the News Guild, our approach is really this is not debate club with your boss. This is you and your coworkers getting together and making a plan of what kind of social, emotional, public, political, and ultimately economic pressure are you willing and able to take over the course of a year to, like I said earlier, get your boss to do what you want or stop them from doing what you don't want them to do. Your mileage varies there, right? Everything's dependent on you and your coworkers and what pressure you're willing to apply, but it's certainly going to be better than where you're at now, which is your boss having total control over everything.
So, how do you figure out which of your coworkers might actually be down for this? Because a lot of entities, whether they be private businesses, nonprofits, and stuff, I've worked at some places, I won't mention which ones, that went through the process of unionization or had unions. And, despite the organization's very public, pro-labor posturing, were rather hostile to unions or maybe, set up things to place more people in management roles, like just this endless sea of middle management to disqualify people from being eligible to, participate or support a union. Basically, what I'm getting at is a lot of places are fairly hostile to the unionization process. So, how can you go about gauging the interest in forming a union in your workplace without getting yourself or maybe your coworkers in trouble?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer to that is methodically, slowly, inorganically in a lot of senses, right? Part of my job is teaching people to become familiar with spreadsheets, with coming up with a rating system to rate your colleagues. And really it comes down to no vibes based assessments, right? You have to get to know a coworker and ultimately get to a point where you can trust them and ask them the question, drop the you word. Sometimes that's easy, right? We're friendly or friends sometimes with a lot of coworkers. We have that relationship of trust. Sometimes it means starting to just get to know a coworker, right? Good rule of thumb is know about their life. And this is the part that's sometimes weird because, generally when we go out and form relationships with people, we don't do it with an agenda. And here you do have to have an agenda and you have to kind of be able to reconcile that ick factor of like, I'm not approaching my coworker necessarily, innocently, right? You're going in there with some kind of agenda, but that agenda is rooted in your own self-interest and theirs, right? Which is building power on the shop floor. So very slowly, very methodically, and you start with your low-hanging fruit, right? The people that you are close to, whether in your shift or your department or who you're friends with. Part of that first C is that social mapping, right? Does Linda go to church with Susan? Well, that's a good place to start. Maybe Linda's the best person to start to talk with Susan instead of you because you don't go to church with Susan, right? You look for those connections. And it can take a long time, right? Sometimes it moves quick. Sometimes it takes a year or more. Southern Poverty Law Center, I think it took us about 6 or 7 months. Some of these digital workplaces now, it's a lot harder because you can't catch somebody on a smoke break, right? You can't take somebody to lunch as easy. You have to awkwardly call them on Teams, and sometimes you have to go out on a limb and take that risk that the boss finds out.
I just want to point out that unions were such an important part of the civil rights movement because of this very thing you're talking about, which is it brings people together who you may not necessarily be predisposed to have a common interest, right? There are all of a sudden, wait a second, this guy, the black guy here, he has the same problems that I do, and we're gonna work together to try to fix this situation because this is where it hurts me now. This is the pocketbook. This is my kid's health care, right? This and that. Um, when let's say I'm a person who is working in a place and there are issues. I remember one issue that would drive me crazy about the SPLC and other jobs I did because of the nature of the work I was engaging in is the lack of mental health care, right? It was always like it was just impossible to get actual decent care. So let's say somebody's angry about like the one thing, right? They're angry about the one thing. When do you go and seek out help from either, an organization like yours or another union? When would you go and contact somebody to try and, get help with your shop to figure out how to fix it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as early as possible. Union organizing, any kind of organizing in a structure, is a skill. It's a set of skills, a set of talents that some people have more innately, some people don't. But you can learn them, like carpentry, like architecture, like any other sort of craft. You can get better at it. You can know where you're not good and where you are good, and learn to play to your strengths and find other people to make up for your weaknesses. Right. So there's lots of resources out there. If you are in publishing, if you are in nonprofits, if you are in news media, you can reach out to the News Guild. Go on our website, newsguild.org or chicagonewsguild.org or mediaworkers.org. I can leave you guys a list for the pod, but you can talk to us, right? My job is mostly pedagogy. It is teaching people how to have these conversations, how to build their structures out. There's the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee is a very great resource. It should be funded exponentially more than it is. That can connect people to either unions or to resources to learn how to do this, right? You don't need an official union to be a union, right? Of course, organizing under a legal structure does give you certain more protections and can eventually be used to be legally enforceable, whatever agreements you come up with your boss. But yeah, definitely reach out to the News Guild or another union. The AFL-CIO has a great website, but do that early. If this is something that you want to pursue, and I really encourage folks who are listening to explore this avenue.
So we've mentioned that there's a lot of workplaces that have management that is hostile to unionizing, right? Whether that is the formation of a union to begin with, or during the contract negotiation phase, will try to apply pressure or penalize people that are participating in the union. What kind of scare tactics can people who are thinking about organizing a union or bringing this up with their coworkers expect if management catches wind of it?
That's usually one of the first questions that people ask me, and I like to turn it around on them, right? Which is ask that. Like, let's name our fears. Let's name our fears now. Yeah, they could fire you, right? It's illegal to fire people for union organizing in the United States, but cocaine is also illegal, right? Like lots of things are illegal. If people think they can get away with breaking a law, they will, and especially your boss. So the first step is to just name the worst cases, name those fears. Most people in a subservient position to another human being knows them with a level of accuracy that is high, right? It's a high level accuracy and can predict exactly how they're going to respond to a union fight. Some of that might be rhetorical. Some of it might be just the kind of messaging your boss gives to people. Emotional appeals, give us another chance, misinformation. But some of it might be retaliatory, right? Taking away shifts, firing you. And yes, it's against the law, but we name and expose those fears, get people talking about them. We call this inoculation. So that when it does happen, it's less scary. And then we have each other's backs. I mean, that's what the boss is more afraid of than the federal government is people having, someone's back who's fired for union organizing or for being outspoken or what have you, and creating a new culture in the workplace It is not easy, and it is not something that can happen overnight, right? With your story, and it's your story to tell, Mike, but some of the actions that we took, a year, 2 years earlier, we wouldn't have been able to do that. But we did. It didn't end up like we wanted to, but I think there was some justice that got served there.
Yeah, it's true. And I was one thing that was very triggering when you said, "Yeah, cocaine is illegal too," is that I was in such denial in my case over the possibility that they might do something illegal, right? From an employee perspective, I was like, it was like, well, they can't do that. That's illegal. As you pointed out, they can do a lot of things to you. It is a very difficult fight when you're unionizing. You're fighting for, you're fighting for yourself and your colleagues. But what rights do workers have when the company starts pressuring people not to unionize? As I said, ABC, very cutthroat, killed the guy who was organizing the shop before it ever really got going. We got to just about 12 people, and then they got him. And I don't know how. Somebody snitched, I guess. What rights do we have when the company starts pressuring people not to unionize and also starts attacking people in that way?
Yeah, well, in terms of the legality of things, the employer is prohibited from, the acronym is TIPS, TIPS, right? And again, I'm not a lawyer, but the employer is prohibited from threatening you, interrogating you, promising you anything, or surveilling you. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? One person's threat is another person's, I was just sharing an opinion, right? But what they are allowed to do is give you facts, quote unquote facts, opinions, or their own experiences, right? So it's the difference between tips and faux. So those are the things to look out for when you are engaged in a union campaign, especially when it is public, right? That's kind of when protections sort of kick into place legally. And your remedy in the private sector, I can't speak to railway workers, public sector workers. Those are under different legislations. But your remedy is going to the National Labor Relations Board. But that's a process that even if you have a slam dunk case, right? If your boss is stupid enough to write an email to you and say, "We're firing you because you're unionizing," you go to the board, and that's going to take a year, 2 years. Right now, it's a 400-day average, right? So this is why discretion is important. Starting with the people you trust is important. Somebody doesn't join a union or form one out of logic. Logically, this is one of the scariest things that you could do, right? You're challenging an authority. In the United States, your employer has more authority in most cases over you than a parent does over a child. So the logic isn't there. Why would you fight the boss? Right? You join your union, you form your union because somebody you care about and trust educates you and asks you and moves you to action. And so that's where you start, is those one-on-one relationships of trust. And you build from there into places where maybe you don't have that trust, but by then you hopefully have enough structure, enough organization to be able to resist those retaliations and those attacks. Jared, you asked like what's a space where you might not want to organize? And I kind of thought about that question a long while ago when you texted me, I think last week, about it.
Yeah.
And that's a tough question to answer because sometimes people come to me and they're in a 2-3 person workplace. And I think those are the hardest places, and paradoxically, the hardest places to organize it because the fight is so much more personal, right? Your boss crying in front of you in a 150 person workplace doesn't have the same hit that your boss crying in front of you in a 5-person workplace is. Your boss is a much more human character. And then sometimes you think, and it's honest, right? Is it worth it for me to engage in this kind of effort that might be a existential strain on the organization itself? And I don't know what to tell folks when they ask me that question. I say, you have to decide whether that's worth it to you. I think it's worth it, and you have to be very strategic. But these smaller newsrooms, these small workplaces, that's, I think, where the toughest fights are in a lot of ways.
Because they will up and do that. These psychopaths, they'll just be like, all right, we're shutting down the shop now. It's actually quite despicable.
It's happened before. I mean,
It's happened before. And sometimes it's just a little more blatant, right? We supported an organizing campaign in Chicago, the Tribe, and didn't expect so much scorched earth anti-union fight. And we got it. And that place is a 2-person workplace, and all it took was kind of whittling it down to put it in this limbo space that we have it in now.
So, say you get your coworkers together, you take the vote, you get a union, you enter the negotiation phase. You've gotten pretty far. Companies, including, speaking from my own experience here, some companies will then start dragging out the process of contract negotiation, which can be incredibly frustrating. It can really sour staff morale. It's, oh, well, we can't promote anybody or give any raises until this contract's done. Oh, well, we can't hire any help for your team because this contract's in limbo. Oh, actually, we can't do this stuff because we're spending all this money on our attorneys to negotiate this contract thing. How do you, keep spirits up or keep pushing through or fight stalling tactics like that? Just because, from my own personal experience and what I've witnessed, it could just be brutal on a place. Because sometimes these contract negotiations can take like a year or more, right? They can go painfully slow.
In fact, on average, and we have to arm people with the truth. And on average, it takes something like 465 days to get to a first contract between certification and signature, right? Ratification, on average. So the answer to that question is this is why I tell people early and often, at least with the News Guild, what I love about the News Guild is we treat our union not like an insurance plan or a gym or an attorney, right? Our union is a gym membership. And we're training and we're getting stronger together. And this is why I tell people straight up, this is not debate club with the boss. And especially in our, pink collar industries, we all think we're going to come to the bargaining table and go, oh man, we're going to really hit them with logic and reason and, what have you. Well, that's all fine and good and you should, but you have to make that plan for what's going to happen when your boss looks at all your reasonable arguments and goes, nah, and throws it back at you. And that's why we have to prepare. We have to make a plan to escalate with a timeline. So that way we're not sitting at the table for 2 years, 3 years. Southern Poverty Law Center, we were at the table for 18 months, right? And it took us 6 months to get to the table, partially because we won our union and then 2 months later, COVID happened, right? So we had to, life got in the way of organizing and that happens. But come up with that plan. Know where you're going to escalate. Know what what hills you're willing to die on and where your concessions are going to be. And yeah, it's going to take some give and take. I think the harder, Mike, you mentioned earlier, oh, okay, so somebody's really fired up about mental health care. And what tends to happen in an organizing committee is that the issues that those folks care about the most aren't going to be the issues that maybe mobilize their coworkers, right? And that's sometimes a hard lesson for people to learn. But we do that because we got no choice. And then sometimes it means that this contract, we accept a mental health care program that's not as good as we wanted it because we're going to have to take some more time to educate our coworkers on why that issue that was important to me should be important to more people. The challenge here, the reality is that you are often, when you are starting a union organizing campaign, planting the seeds of a tree you might not get much shade under. And we have to be okay with that. As what I tell people is we're living in a society where the gremlins that run our lives are so all powerful. What can we do to shift that power balance? And it's a generational fight. I'm kind of inviting people to get involved in a protracted struggle here. It's not something that we're going to fix overnight because it wasn't built overnight, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was it burnt in a day.
What's one thing you wish you knew then when you first started organizing that you know now?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know if I have a straight answer for it. I think the big one is be prepared, is treat this like a military science. I think what I like to tell people now is forming a union is a combination between an amphibious invasion of Normandy and a wedding, right? You are going to be really nervous. You're going to have cold feet. And part of this is developing that plan to say, I'm going to turn off the mammal part of my brain and just follow the instructions I've set for myself. Because you don't want to be walking down that aisle and not know where you're supposed to stand, if you're going to hit that beach in that landing craft, you want to know exactly what you're supposed to do when you hit that beach, right?
Well, Esteban, thanks for talking to us about unionizing. I hope this was helpful to our listeners who may be considering doing something like this and gives them a place to start. But this is a music podcast, first and foremost. That occasionally gets political. Esteban, what kind of music are you bumping?
Oh, I've been on a Bob Dylan kick lately. Don't know why, but I've been listening to a lot of Bob Dylan, and
Well, there's a lot of Bob Dylan to listen to. What era of Bob Dylan are we talking about here?
I anticipated your question, and Visions of Johanna has been on my mind.
Oh, all right. Mike, you ever listen to Bob Dylan?
I really like is it Blonde on Blonde? That's the one with, what are the songs on that one? I haven't listened in a while. Hold on. Yes, I like that one. Is that what it's fucking called? I don't remember. Hold on. Yeah, Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis, whatever. I like that song. Sorry, I'm not a huge Bob Dylan guy, but I do like those songs. I like it.
Which is Visions of Johanna is on that
It's on
album.
that album.
Yeah.
That's right. That's the one. Yes. Yeah, I had that one on CD back in the day.
All right, Esteban. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We'll throw a bunch of links in the episode description for people to go check out.
I just want to say Esteban is a hero. A hero's farewell at the end of the podcast.
I appreciate you guys, and I'll follow up with some links. Thanks for everything.